Rosalind Thorne came up the steps of Amberley House alone, in her mother's remade silk, and the whispering started before the footman had finished announcing her name. "Miss Thorne," he called, into the crowded landing, and there was the smallest hesitation before it, the kind that told the whole room a second name was expected and had not arrived. No father, no brother, no aunt trailing behind with a chaperone's watchful eye. Just a woman of 23 crossing the threshold of the largest ball of the season entirely on her own 2 feet, and the whispering that followed her down the receiving line had nothing kind in it at all. "Alone," said a voice not troubling to lower itself, somewhere to her left. "One does wonder what a woman must be, to come to a ball with no one at all to bring her." "Desperate, I should think," said another, and the small cluster of feathered heads dissolved into the particular laughter that costs nothing to give and everything to receive. Rosalind kept her chin level and her pace even, because she had decided, on the drive over in a hired carriage she could not properly afford, that she would not give the room the satisfaction of seeing her flinch, whatever it cost her to hold the line. She had come because there had been no other way to come at all. Her father, Baron Thorne, had suffered an apoplexy in March that left the left side of his face slack and his speech thickened past easy understanding, and there was no mother living, no brother, no aunt willing to travel the 60 miles from Bath on a week's notice. Only a cousin, Edgar Thorne, who managed what remained of the estate's affairs and who had told her, with a smile that did not reach his eyes, that a woman without an escort simply did not attend such things, and that she had far better remain at Thorne Hall where she belonged. She had come anyway, because the ball was being given by Lady Amberley, whose husband sat on the parish trust that controlled the small annuity left to Rosalind under her late mother's marriage settlement, an annuity Edgar had spent the better part of a year attempting to have redirected into the general estate accounts, on the grounds that an unmarried woman had no need of independent income when her cousin was so evidently capable of managing her affairs for her. Rosalind had written to Lady Amberley's own solicitor twice without answer. She had concluded, in the end, that the only certain way to be heard was to be seen, in person, at the one gathering where the trustee himself would be present, and that no chaperone in England was worth losing the annuity that stood between herself and complete dependence on a cousin who had already shown her exactly what his management looked like. She had weighed the cost of the whispering against the cost of losing the last independent thing she owned, and she had chosen, deliberately, to be laughed at rather than ruined. Star. Percival Ashgrove, Duke of Wintershall, had not intended to attend the Amberley ball at all, and stood now at the edge of the ballroom floor with a glass of wine he had no intention of finishing, wondering why he had let his own aunt talk him into an evening he had spent the whole carriage ride regretting. He was 36, unmarried, and had spent 11 years cultivating a reputation for such thorough social indifference that the county had long ago stopped troubling him with introductions, on the general understanding that the Duke of Wintershall danced with no one, courted no one, and could be relied upon to leave any gathering within 2 hours of arriving. It was not haughtiness, whatever the drawing rooms assumed. He had buried a wife 6 years before, in her second confinement, and had discovered, in the years since, that the particular performance of a ballroom, the bright forced gaiety, the careful matchmaking calculations running behind every smile, had become nearly unbearable to him, a room full of people playing at a happiness he no longer entirely trusted himself to feel. He was watching the door with the detached, exhausted patience of a man counting down the minutes until he could reasonably leave when Rosalind Thorne came up the receiving line alone, and something in the particular steadiness of her carriage, chin level, pace even, giving the whispering room around her not 1 inch of the reaction it was fishing for, caught his attention in a way 11 years of careful indifference had not prepared him to resist. He watched her for the better part of 20 minutes before he did anything at all. He watched 3 separate young men decline, with elaborate politeness, to solicit her for a set, each excusing himself to a partner already claimed the moment her name was mentioned. He watched a cluster of matrons by the refreshment table turn their fans toward her like a battery of small, unfriendly weapons. And he watched Rosalind Thorne stand through the whole of it with her back straight and her face composed, alone at the edge of a ballroom that had decided, collectively and instantly, precisely what kind of woman she must be. His aunt, Lady Marbury, caught his sleeve before he had gone 3 steps, her voice pitched for his ears alone. Percival, you have not danced at one of these affairs in 6 years, and I find it rather remarkable that the first exception should be a woman arrived without the smallest scrap of chaperonage. People will talk. People are already talking, Aunt. I have been listening to them do it for the better part of 20 minutes, and I find I have grown considerably more interested in giving them something worth the talking than in continuing to stand here agreeing with your assessment of the risk. He did not slow his step. I watched Sarah die 6 years ago, and I have spent every ballroom since convinced there was nothing left in a room like this one worth crossing a floor for. I find, tonight, that I was wrong about that, and I do not intend to spend one more evening proving myself right by default. Lady Marbury released his sleeve and watched her nephew cross the ballroom floor with an expression that shifted, by degrees, from alarm to something considerably softer. He set down his wine and crossed the floor. Star. Miss Thorne, he bowed correctly, at the exact depth propriety required, loudly enough that the nearest cluster of whisperers could not mistake what was happening. I believe this is our dance. Rosalind looked up at the Duke of Wintershall, a man she had heard of only by reputation, cold and untouchable and universally left alone by a society that had long since stopped expecting anything of him, and felt her carefully maintained composure waver for the first time all evening, not from distress, but from sheer surprise. Your Grace, I don't believe we have been introduced. No, he agreed, and I find I have grown tired, this last quarter hour, of waiting for someone in this room to trouble themselves with the formality. I am Wintershall. You are. I am reliably informed by every unkind whisper within 20 feet. Miss Thorne, arrived without escort and already condemned for the crime of it. I should like to dance with you regardless, if you'll permit me, and I confess I am rather looking forward to watching this room recalculate its opinion in real time. Rosalind studied him for a moment, the flat, unreadable calm of his face, the particular deliberate loudness of his bow, and understood, with a small shock, that whatever his reasons, they were not pity. I would be glad of it, Your Grace, she said, and put her hand in his. Star. The whispering did not stop. It simply changed shape, the way whispering always does when the facts on the ground refuse to cooperate with the story already decided. By the end of the first dance, half the room had revised its theory entirely. She must be an heiress after all, someone whispered, or connected to Wintershall's own family in some way the county had not yet uncovered, because surely a man of his reputation would not otherwise trouble himself. By the end of the second, which he requested before the first had properly concluded, in flat defiance of every rule about a lady dancing twice running with the same partner, the room had stopped bothering with theories and simply stared. You are creating a scandal, Your Grace, Rosalind said, low, as they turned through the figures of the dance. I did not come here to make you the subject of gossip on my account. I have been the subject of this county's gossip for 11 years, Miss Thorne, on the general theory that a duke who does not dance and does not marry must be concealing some tragic flaw worth speculating about at length. I find I have grown entirely immune to it. He did not look away from her as he said it. You, on the other hand, came into this room prepared to be laughed at for the crime of arriving alone, and I find I would rather spend an evening giving this room something considerably more interesting to discuss than a woman's unescorted arrival. That is a kind reason. It is not the only reason, said the Duke of Wintershall, though I find I am not yet prepared to examine the rest of it too closely, 6 minutes into an acquaintance. Star. They spoke. Between the dances he claimed with increasing disregard for propriety's usual limits, of the actual reason she had come, because he asked, plainly, why a woman would risk exactly the reception she had received rather than simply stay home, and Rosalind found, somewhere in the honesty of his asking, that she owed him a truthful answer rather than a polite deflection. My father cannot manage his own affairs since his illness, and my cousin has made it his particular project, these last several months, to have my mother's annuity folded into the estate accounts he already controls, she said. Lord Amberley sits on the trust that governs it. I wrote to his solicitor twice and received no answer, and I concluded that a woman easily ignored on paper is considerably harder to ignore standing in front of him at his own wife's ball. And has he noticed you yet? I have not yet found the opportunity to make him. I rather think, Your Grace, that the last 20 minutes have made me considerably more visible to this entire room than I had actually planned for, which was rather the point, though not quite in the manner I intended. Something in Percival Ashgrove's face shifted at that. Not amusement exactly, but a kind of quiet respect he had not expected to feel for anyone in that ballroom that evening. You have not once, in this whole conversation, asked me to intervene on your behalf. I did not come here for a champion, Your Grace. I came for an introduction, and I have found, in 23 years of managing rather more than a woman of my age is generally credited with, that a champion who does the fighting for you tends to leave you exactly as dependent as the arrangement you were trying to escape in the first place. Only dependent on a kindermaster instead of a crueler 1-inch. Rosalind's voice was steady, though something in it had softened, hearing his silence rather than his argument. I would be glad of your introduction to Lord Amberley, because a duke's notice opens a door 2 letters could not. I would not be glad of your fighting my battle for me, however well-intentioned, because I have fought this particular one alone for the better part of a year, and I find I have got rather good at it. Then I shall confine myself strictly to introductions, Percival said, something that was almost a smile at the corner of his mouth, and reserve my fighting for battles you actually ask me to join. That, said Rosalind, is the first entirely correct thing anyone in this ballroom has said to me all evening. Then let us remedy the Amberley matter properly, he said, because I happen to know him rather well, and I find I have absolutely no objection to introducing you to him myself, in front of every person in this room who has spent the evening deciding you were desperate rather than determined. Star. He brought her to Lord Amberley within the half-hour, and made the introduction himself, with the particular unhurried authority of a man whose good opinion the whole room had spent 11 years trying and failing to earn. Amberley, may I present Miss Rosalind Thorne, whose late mother's settlement I understand falls under your trust. She has written to your solicitor twice on a matter she tells me has gone unanswered, and I confess I am curious myself now to hear the particulars, given that a woman does not generally risk the reception she received tonight over a trifling matter. Lord Amberley, cornered by a duke's own direct interest in front of half his wife's ballroom, could hardly do otherwise than attend properly to what he had previously found convenient to overlook. Miss Thorne, I regret that I was not aware any correspondence had gone unanswered. Please, tell me the whole of it. Rosalind told him, plainly, without embellishment, the exact shape of Edgar Thorne's campaign to fold her independent annuity into accounts he already controlled, and the convenient illness that had kept her father from ever being consulted properly on the matter, and Lord Amberley's face, listening, moved from polite attention to genuine, dawning concern. This is a clear breach of the settlement's terms, Miss Thorne, if what you describe is accurate, and I will have my solicitor examine the matter directly. This week, rather than let it languish further, he glanced, briefly, toward the Duke, standing at her side. I confess I am rather ashamed it wanted a Duke's personal interest to have my own solicitor's negligence properly attended to. You have my apology for the delay, and my assurance the matter will be settled correctly. Star. Edgar Thorne, watching from across the ballroom with an expression that had curdled considerably over the course of the evening, did not take the reversal quietly. He crossed the floor once Amberley had moved off, and drew Rosalind aside with the particular false warmth of a man performing concern for an audience. Cousin, I had thought we agreed you would remain at Thornhall this evening, given your father's condition requires such constant attention. My father's condition requires attention I have provided every day since March. Edgar, in one evening's absence, properly arranged with his nurse, changes nothing about that care. I came because Lord Amberley's negligence in answering my letters left me no other recourse, and I find the matter is already, this very evening, being properly attended to. You have made yourself the subject of considerable talk, arriving unescorted. I have made myself considerably harder to overlook, which was rather the point, since 2 letters addressed to a solicitor achieved nothing at all. Rosalind did not lower her voice, and several nearby guests, she noticed, were listening with undisguised interest. You have spent a year, Edgar, telling me that a woman alone cannot manage her own affairs, while simultaneously arranging matters so that I would never be permitted the opportunity to manage them myself. I find those two positions considerably harder to hold together in a ballroom full of witnesses than they were in the privacy of your own study. Star. Percival Ashgrove, standing near enough to hear the whole exchange, did not intervene, because he had watched Rosalind Thorne handle her cousin's performance of concern with a precision that required no rescue at all. But he stayed close, visibly, in a way that told the watching room exactly whose side the most untouchable man in England had chosen, and Edgar Thorne, understanding the shape of that particular arithmetic all at once, retreated from the conversation with as much dignity as he could gather. "This is not finished," he said, low, before he went. "No," Rosalind agreed. "I don't imagine it is. But it is considerably further from finished in my favor than it was an hour ago, and I find I am content to let the rest of it unfold in daylight, with Lord Amberley's solicitor properly attending to it, rather than in whatever private arrangement you had hoped to manage in the dark." Star. The final dance of the evening was a waltz, and Percival Ashgrove claimed it without asking, simply appearing at her side as the musicians began and offering his hand with the particular quiet confidence of a man who had decided, somewhere over the course of the last 3 hours, that he was done pretending indifference to how the evening ended. "You have spent an entire evening making yourself the most talked-about woman in this county," he said, as they turned through the steps, "and I find I have spent it rather enjoying watching you do it. I did not plan for any of this, Your Grace. I planned to be laughed at, and to endure it long enough to catch Lord Amberley's attention, and I had not accounted for a duke deciding to make an evening's entertainment of appending the whole room's expectations alongside me. Nor had I, if I am honest. I came tonight fully intending to leave within the hour, as I generally do, having found ballrooms rather unbearable these last 6 years for reasons that have nothing to do with you and everything to do with a grief I have not much discussed with anyone in this room." His voice was low, meant only for her. "I watched you walk in alone, prepared to be laughed at and refusing to give the room the satisfaction of it, and I found something in that particular courage considerably more interesting than anything I have encountered at an evening like this and longer than I care to admit." "That is not quite a declaration, Your Grace." "No," Percival agreed, "because I have known you 3 hours, and I find I am not yet fool enough to mistake 3 hours of genuine interest for anything more permanent than it currently is. But I would like the opportunity to make it more, Miss Thorne, properly, with calls and letters, and whatever tedious formal courtship this county requires, because I find that a woman who would rather be laughed at than surrender the last independent thing she owns is precisely the kind of person I have spent 6 years believing did not exist in rooms like this 1 inch. Star. The county's opinion of Rosalind Thorne did not turn overnight, whatever the ballroom's final hours might have suggested, and the weeks between the Amberley Ball and Percival's first proper call at Thorne Hall taught her a great deal about exactly how slowly a reputation mends once it has been publicly damaged, even in the presence of a duke's evident favor. Lady Fenwick, who had led the whispering at the ball itself, called on 2 mutual acquaintances that week specifically to observe, with practiced sorrow, that a duke's momentary attention was hardly a character reference, and that women considerably more desperate than Miss Thorne had contrived far stranger schemes to catch a titled husband's eye. The story traveled, as such stories do, gaining a harder edge with each retelling, until by the following Sunday it had settled into a shape Rosalind recognized all too well from Edgar's own methods, that she had engineered the whole appearance of friendlessness deliberately, knowing precisely which duke would be present and precisely how his own reputation for gallant rescue, however dormant these 6 years, might be roused by the correct arrangement of circumstances. She heard the whole of it from the vicar's wife, who told it to her gently and with evident distress at having to be the one to carry such an ugly tale to her door. "They are saying you planned it, Miss Thorne, that you knew his grace would attend, and arranged your own arrival to appear as pitiable as possible, the better to catch his notice." "I did not know he would attend, Mrs. Pell, and I could not have arranged my own friendlessness if I had wished to, since it is rather thoroughly genuine and has been since March." Rosalind kept her voice level, though the unfairness of it settled cold in her chest. "I find it a curious thing that a woman ignored by 3 young men and mocked openly by a roomful of matrons is accused of engineering her own humiliation, rather than simply having endured it as it actually occurred." "I know it, my dear. I only tell you because I think it better you hear it from a friend than discover it unprepared. Rosalind did not go to Percival with the rumor immediately. In much the same way she had not gone to him seeking rescue at the ball itself. She had decided, somewhere in the days since, that she would rather be known for how she managed her own difficulties than for how readily she reached for his name to shield her from them. But he heard it regardless, within the fortnight, from his own aunt, who repeated it to him with rather less delicacy than the vicar's wife had shown Rosalind. He came to Thorn Hall the very next morning, uninvited and considerably earlier than propriety generally allowed for a first proper call. "I have heard what Lady Fenwick is saying," he said, before he had even properly removed his hat, "that you engineered the whole appearance of the evening to catch my notice. I have heard it too, Your Grace, some days past, and I confess I did not trouble you with it, because I judged it a battle I was equally capable of managing without your intervention, same as the first one. I am not here to intervene, Miss Thorne. I am here because I find I cannot abide the notion of you facing that particular lie alone, when I know, better than anyone in this county, precisely how little truth is in it. I chose to cross that floor, Rosalind, entirely on my own judgment and against every one of my own long-held habits, and I will not have the county rewrite that choice into something you contrived. As though my own agency in the matter counted for nothing at all, his voice had gone low and entirely in earnest. I should like your permission to correct the story publicly, not because you need rescuing from it, but because I find I have a considerable stake in the truth of my own actions being properly understood, and I would rather not let a lie about my character stand unchallenged any more than I would let one about yours." Rosalind considered that for a long moment. Turning it over with the same careful attention, she gave every decision that touched her own independence. "That," she said finally, "is a request I can accept, Your Grace, because you are asking to correct a lie about your own choice, not to manage my reputation on my behalf. I find I have no objection whatsoever to that distinction." He corrected it plainly, at the next assembly he attended, stating without embarrassment that he had crossed the ballroom floor entirely of his own will, moved by nothing more than the sight of a woman refusing to be diminished, and that any suggestion of engineered pity insulted his own judgment rather more than it insulted hers. The story did not vanish entirely. Such stories rarely do, but it lost, within the month, whatever teeth Lady Fenwick had hoped to give it, and Rosalind found herself, by the time Percival's proper courtship began in earnest, considerably more a subject of grudging curiosity than open mockery. He called at Thorn Hall 3 days after that correction, properly, with his own solicitor in tow rather than simply his own interest, because he had learned, in the intervening days, the full shape of what Edgar Thorne's campaign against his cousin's annuity had actually involved, a pattern of small diversions and delayed accountings that Lord Amberley's own solicitor confirmed, within the week, amounted to a clear and prosecutable breach of trust. "You did not need to involve your own man in this," Rosalind told him, when he explained the arrangement over tea in her father's small parlor, her father himself dozing in his chair by the fire, considerably more peaceful now that the matter weighing on his daughter had begun, visibly, to lift. "I did not need to. I wanted to, because I have found, these last 3 days, that I think of very little else besides the shape of an evening where I watched you refuse to be diminished by an entire ballroom's worst assumptions, and I find the least I can offer in return for that particular education is to make certain the man attempting to diminish you in fact does not succeed." Percival set down his cup. "I am not courting you to rescue you, Miss Thorne. Your own courage rescued you considerably before I ever crossed that ballroom floor. I am courting you because I find I would like to spend a great many more evenings in the company of a woman who walks into a room prepared to be laughed at and simply declines to perform the expected humiliation." Edgar Thorne's final move came in the autumn. Once it was plain his cousin's courtship with the Duke of Wintershall had become the settled talk of 3 counties and considerably more dangerous to his own interests than a solicitor's inquiry alone. He attempted, through a compliant local magistrate owed old favors, to have Baron Thorne declared entirely incompetent to manage his own affairs on the strength of the apoplexy, which would have placed the whole of the estate, and by extension, whatever remained of Rosalind's inheritance, under Edgar's own guardianship as nearest male relation. It very nearly succeeded, because the magistrate was inclined to favor the petition and Baron Thorn's own speech, though his mind remained entirely clear, was thick enough with the illness's effects that a hostile examination could easily have been made to look like incapacity. Rosalind brought Dr. Pell, who had attended her father since March and could attest plainly to the clarity of mind beneath the halting speech, and she brought her father himself, propped carefully in a chair, and she asked the magistrate to address her father directly rather than accept Edgar's account of his condition secondhand. "Ask him yourself, sir, whether he knows his own daughter, and whether he wishes his nephew to manage his affairs or whether he would prefer they remain, as they have been managed these 6 months past, in the hands of the daughter who has nursed him every single day since March." The Baron's answer, thick and halting and entirely unmistakable in its meaning, named his daughter, and the magistrate, faced with a clear-minded man's own clear preference stated plainly in front of witnesses, dismissed Edgar's petition within the hour. Edgar Thorne left the county before Christmas, his reputation considerably diminished by a story that had, by then, traveled through every drawing room that mattered, that he had attempted to have his own uncle declared incompetent in order to seize an estate the uncle was entirely capable of overseeing with his daughter's help. And a man who will attempt that particular cruelty against his own family is not a man any respectable house cares to receive. Percival Ashgrove asked Rosalind Thorne to marry him in December, in the same small parlor where he had first properly courted her, with her father dozing contentedly by the fire, and the whole ugly business of Edgar's schemes finally, thoroughly concluded. "I have thought a great deal, these past months, about the evening I watched you walk into that ballroom alone," he said. "I have concluded that I do not wish to spend the rest of my life being the man who merely admired your courage from across a room. I would like to be the man who stands beside you in every room from here forward, not because you require the standing, but because I have found I am considerably happier in your company than I have been in 6 years of careful solitude, and I find I no longer wish to be careful about anything where you are concerned. That is not quite as plain as your first speech to me, Your Grace. I have had months to grow considerably more nervous about the answer, Miss Thorne, which I find has rather undone my gift for plain speaking." He took her hand. "Marry me, not to rescue either of us from anything, because I find neither of us particularly needs rescuing any longer, simply because I would like the whole of my life to look like the last several months have looked, and I cannot think of a better reason than that to ask." "Then yes," said Rosalind Thorne, "though I will remind you, Your Grace, for the whole of our life together, that I walked into that ballroom entirely prepared to leave it alone as well, and that whatever you offer me now, I have already proven I do not require it to stand on my own 2 feet. "I am counting on that," said Percival Ashgrove. "It is rather the entire reason I crossed the floor." They were married in the spring at the small church near Thorne Hall, with Baron Thorne given the great joy of walking his daughter down the aisle himself, his steps slow and his speech still thickened by the illness that would never entirely leave him, but his mind, as it had always remained, entirely and unmistakably his own. Baron Thorne, walking slowly beside his daughter afterward on Percival's arm as the wedding party crossed the churchyard, stopped once and said, in the halting speech that had never fully left him, that he was glad, and that her mother would have been glad, and that he was sorry it had wanted an apoplexy and a scoundrel of a nephew before anyone troubled to see what his daughter had always been capable of. Rosalind told him, kneeling briefly beside his chair despite her wedding silk, that he had seen it all along, every single day since March, and that his seeing had been the only good opinion she had actually needed to survive the rest. The following winter, at the very same Amberley ball where the whole business had begun, the Duchess of Wintershall arrived on her husband's arm, and the room that had once whispered about a woman bold enough to come alone now watched, considerably more kindly, as she moved through the same crowd that had once condemned her. "Lady Fenwick is still standing at the edges, I notice," Percival observed, nodding toward the same cluster of feathered matrons who had led the whispering a year before. "Let her stand there. I find I have very little interest in her opinion now, Your Grace, and considerably more in this dance you have not yet properly claimed." Rosalind smiled, the particular steady composure that had first caught his attention now entirely unguarded, entirely her own. I walked into this room alone once, prepared to be laughed at. I find I much prefer walking out of it on your arm instead, though I want you to know, always, that I would have found my own way regardless. I have never doubted it, said the Duke of Wintershall, and led his wife onto the floor.